One thing I want to say about children's social skills is that they really begin at home. So what can you do as a parent to really facilitate the development of social skills and empathy in your child? And the answer is that the only way you can really do that is by your relationship with your child. If you treat a child with respect, the child will learn not only that they're respected, but they learn to be respectful. If you teach a child with empathy and interact with empathy, the child not only learns that you care about their feelings, but they also learn how to be empathetic toward other people. So they really mirror not only what you did, but they see the model in you for how to behave. So how do you teach kids social skills? Well, the important thing is that when a child has emotions, when you notice a child being upset by something or delighted by something, if you see that as an opportunity to engage your child, a moment for teaching or a moment just for closeness and intimacy, that's the beginning. Awareness of the child's emotions. And once you become aware that your child's emotional, then you can be an emotion coach. Now, what does that mean, being an emotion coach? So our research found that emotion coaching parents go through 5 different steps. And these steps are critical in teaching a child social skills because they learn not only how you are toward them, but they also learn how you behave. They learn your role as well as what it feels like to be a caring parent. And the first step in emotion coaching is to actually notice and be aware of an emotional moment and see it as an opportunity for getting closer, for being connected to your child, or a teaching moment. So that's step 1, that awareness. The second step is to really try to understand the emotions the child is feeling, asking questions, really being interested in what the child is feeling and trying to understand that. The third part is helping the child put verbal labels to their feelings. Oh, you're really angry. You must be furious. Oh, no wonder. That makes sense to me. So that's the fourth step, accepting the child's emotions as being valid. Now, this is tricky because even when there's misbehavior, you can still accept the emotions behind the misbehavior. For example, if there's been a fight among siblings and, your child has done something destructive to their siblings' toys, you may empathize with the emotion that gave rise to that destructive behavior, but still not approve of the aggression that your kid displayed. And there is the fifth step, which is consequences for misbehavior, setting limits. That's an important part of emotion coaching. And in this way, you let the child know what your values are, what the values of your family are. And you model morality. You model being a good person. And by setting these limits on misbehavior, you really teach the child the consequences of the misbehavior and the misbehavior being unacceptable to you. Now, if there's no misbehavior, that fifth step of emotion coaching will involve problem solving, which is, so why are you feeling sad? Usually sadness involves some kind of loss of something important. So helping the child identify the source of the loss is really important. If the child is angry, usually they're frustrated because a goal has been blocked. So there's good learning. What's the frustration? What's the goal? What's blocking it? And what's the link between frustration and aggression? Understanding all of that is very powerful in the problem solving, figuring out how they can act in the future that will be much more functional. So that's emotion coaching, just those 5 steps. Now, what we discovered in our lab was that the consequences of being an emotion coach of your child are vast. Not only are they able to really focus attention and shift attention, but they understand themselves better and they understand other kids better. So their social relationships with other children are better. And that's one of the consequences. The other consequence is that even at a certain level of IQ, if you look at two children who have the same intelligence, the one who's emotion coached will do much better in school and be better at learning because of this ability to self-soothe, calm down, focus attention, and really understand what they need in the moment. They learn to problem solve for themselves as well through emotion coaching. So this has enormous consequences for a child's emotional and social development and social skill development. So that's a powerful thing that you can do. Now, the other thing you can do is really know that in school, there are these social situations that really require a lot of kids. For example, peer entry. This is a situation where teachers a lot of time will say, Johnny, why don't you go over there and join that group? And the child has to walk over to a group that's already functioning and figure out a way to seamlessly enter that group. And there's a situation where we know from research that kids who are effective at doing that just kind of don't call attention to themselves. Watch what the group is doing and start actually doing what the group is doing along with them. They sort of seamlessly enter the group in that way. And, and you can role play this with your child because entry is a very important skill to learn. Now, what can educators do? How can the classroom become a place where kids actually learn social skills and build empathy for one another? Well, an amazing scientist named Elliot Aronson created a thing called the Jigsaw Classroom. What he noticed was that most classrooms are highly competitive. Teachers will ask a question and kids are raising their hands, to answer, and other kids are trying to look invisible so they won't get called on. And then there's kind of a competition among certain kids to really get that teacher's attention. And so it's a highly competitive environment, and some people are really afraid, some children are really afraid of being humiliated, called out when they don't know the answer to a question or they aren't prepared. Well, Harrison created a classroom in which in anything that the teacher was teaching, she broke it into parts. For example, if they were studying the life of Eleanor Roosevelt, right? Franklin Delano Roosevelt's wife, but a great woman, and they divided it into parts. And some kids just learned passages from a biography of Eleanor Roosevelt that had to do with her early life. And other kids learned about what her life was like in the White House when she was First Lady. And others after her husband died, and she became very involved in the United Nations. So they broke this learning into parts, and each kid mastered one part of an article about Eleanor Roosevelt's life. And the teacher met with the expert groups together. So there'd be a group of kids who were studying just the early part of her life, and they discussed it, and all the kids really learned about that. And the teacher made sure that they really knew that part of the article really well. And another group was learning about Eleanor Roosevelt in the White House, and they talked about it, and every kid became an expert in that part of her life. And then they constituted groups where they had to learn from each other about Eleanor Roosevelt's life. So maybe a child was an expert on the White House years, but another child was an expert on the United Nations years when she was a widow, and another child on her childhood. And they learned from each other in these jigsaw groups, because the jigsaw, like a puzzle, they learned about Eleanor Roosevelt from one another, right? So they stopped teasing one another. They stopped being hostile to one another. And Elliot Aronson did this during a period of integration in the Austin, Texas school system. And what he found was in these jigsaw groups, not only did everybody learn well, and the kids who ordinarily would try to hide and were not competent on the test became competent. And the best kids did as well in the jigsaw classroom as they did ordinarily. But what they got from one another was that they learned how to care about one another. Because if they teased somebody in the classroom for being different, then they would do bad on that part of the exam that kid was an expert on. And so by learning cooperatively rather than in a competitive environment, everybody did better, but their social skills improved, their empathy improved, their caring for one another, and their prejudice decreased dramatically. So they became much more functional kids in learning from one another. And I don't have to tell you how important it is in the future and in today's jobs to be able to work with other people. And that is what they're learning as well in school. They're learning how to work with other people in a team. So that's what teachers can do differently, really create opportunities for some of the learning that happens in the classroom to use this Jigsaw Classroom of Elliot Aronson's. And this approach has been tried more than a dozen times in every continent on the planet. And it's replicated these very powerful effects in changing the classroom into a learning environment where nobody gets bullied, nobody gets picked on, nobody gets to be the victim of prejudice or hostility, but instead learn to work together. And those social skills are critical for the rest of a kid's life.